Let's talk about one of the most powerful and maybe one of the most misleading forces in our social lives, the first impression. We're going to pull back the curtain on how your brain makes these lightning-fast judgments and why that instinct can be both an incredible tool and a really dangerous illusion.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. I want you to think about the last time you met someone new. Before a single word was spoken, your brain had already sized them up. It had already made a call. But how fast are we talking? Well, the answer is basically instantaneous. That's right, 100 milliseconds. That's 1/10 of a second. Research from Princeton psychologist Alexander Todorov shows that is all it takes for our brain to look at a face and form an impression on things like trustworthiness and competence. It is a judgment made in, quite literally, a flash. And here's where it gets really wild. You'd think, okay, sure, that's just my gut reaction. If I had more time, I'd make a smarter, more rational call. But it turns out that's not what happens at all. Studies show that when you give people more time to look at a face, their initial opinion doesn't change. Nope, they just become more confident that their first split-second assessment was the right one.
So what on earth is happening in that tiny fraction of a second? Well, this isn't magic. It's a deeply wired, ancient survival mechanism. We're about to look at the brain's super-fast shortcut for figuring out the social world.
This whole process has a name. It's called thin slicing. It's our brain's absolutely incredible ability to find important patterns from just the tiniest slivers of experience. And it's all powered by a part of our mind that works completely behind the scenes, outside of our awareness, kind of like a high-speed computer that's built just for recognizing patterns.
And maybe the most stunning, most mind-blowing demonstration of thin slicing comes from this landmark study about how we evaluate teachers.
So in this study, researchers had students watch silent video clips of teachers they had never ever met. Some of these clips were only 6 seconds long, just 6 seconds. And they asked the students to rate the teachers. The result was absolutely shocking. Those 6-second ratings were almost identical to the full end-of-semester evaluations from students who had spent an entire semester with that teacher.
How is that even possible? Well, it's because the information takes a shortcut. When you see a new face, the visual data doesn't just go to the logical part of your brain. It zips down a much older, more primitive survival circuit. This circuit is designed to completely bypass conscious thought and answer one critical question, friend or foe. And it makes that decision before you're even aware it's happening.
And if we look inside the brain, we can see two key areas just light up. First, the amygdala. That's your brain's alarm system, its high-speed threat detector. And second, the posterior cingulate cortex, which basically assesses value. Together, they act like a tiny appraisal committee in your head, instantly slapping a value score on a new person, telling you whether to approach them or, run the other way. But here's the catch. This ancient system, which was perfectly designed for making life or death decisions out on the savannah, has some pretty serious bugs when it's operating in our complex, modern world. What used to be a life-saving tool can now trap us in a powerful illusion. Okay, the single biggest bug in the system is a bias with a very long name, the fundamental attribution error. All it really means is that we have this default tendency to believe that what people do is a direct reflection of who they are, while almost completely ignoring the situation around them. And we all do this, all the time. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and what's your first thought? What a selfish jerk, right? You blame their character. But when you have to cut someone off, oh, you've got a perfectly good reason. I'm late for a huge meeting. For them, it's who they are. For us, it's always the situation. And this mistake gets a huge power-up from another illusion called the halo effect. This is where just one positive trait, like say someone is good-looking, creates this halo that makes us automatically assume everything else about them is positive too.
We just overgeneralize from physical cues constantly. It's wild. Studies show that people with baby faces, big eyes, rounder face, they're seen as more naive and trustworthy, which can actually impact things like court sentences. We assume attractive people are smarter and more capable, with literally zero proof. And someone whose eyebrows are just naturally a bit lower might get labeled as dominant or angry, even if they're perfectly calm. And that gets to the absolute heart of the problem, which Alexander Todorov sums up perfectly here. Our brain is hardwired to make these judgments based on how a face looks, even when the link between those looks and a person's actual character is flimsy or doesn't exist at all.
So if our own instincts can be this fast and this flawed, what are we supposed to do? Well, the answer isn't to try to stop having first impressions. That's impossible.
The real answer is to learn how to consciously override the system, to basically hack your own social code.
And we can do this with two really practical steps. First, take control of the signals you are sending out. Remember, your posture, your eye contact, it's all being thin-sliced by the people you meet. And second, and this is the really important one, you have to activate your own pause button. When you feel that instant judgment pop into your head, you have to deliberately stop and question it. Ask yourself, wait a minute, what else could be going on here?
This simple act, just taking a moment for perspective, is our best weapon against that fundamental attribution error. So instead of deciding that your quiet coworker is unfriendly, you challenge that initial story. Could they just be tired? Stressed about something? By questioning that first narrative, we can move from a snap judgment to a much more accurate and usually much more generous understanding of people.
So in the end, it leaves us with this fascinating question to chew on. Our first impressions feel like we're just seeing reality for what it is, but the science shows us that we're actually helping to create that reality. The story you tell yourself in that first 100 milliseconds doesn't just describe your social world. In a very real way, it builds it.